to have this discussion with you this afternoon, and this is an opportunity for the audience to participate after we've heard the initial panel presentations. My name is Andrea Rohr. I'm the no longer the immediate past president. I'm the past president of UCEA. Cindy Reed is our current past president here in the audience. We're excited to have this conversation because whether it's a discussion of leveraging standards or leveraging teacher evaluation policies or whatever the case in your current context, what we are finding is that we have to turn internally as an organization, but also as faculty in the field, to ask the question, how can we constructively use the policy environment and leverage that for changes around increasing our program quality, increasing the outcomes associated with our graduates who are going forward to lead, and more importantly, what are the outcomes that we're looking for in schools, and how do our leaders that we're helping produce and that are working with us, what impact do they have once they are in the field? Joining us today for this wonderful discussion, we have a very distinguished panel of 5 individuals. I'm going to introduce them along with a very short bio as we go, and then after the introductions, we'll turn it over to the panel for a 5 to 7 minute discussion, followed by questions and answers. And what I would like you to do, just as a logistical issue, is after the panel, each member has presented, as they're transitioning one from the other to the podium or at their seats, depending on their preference. We'd like you to jot down questions you may have about a particular presentation, identify it by name, and then Amy Reynolds and other UCA staff. Thank you, Amy. She's in the back of the room. She'll be circulating at the end of the presentations to take your questions so that we can field as many of them at the end of the session as possible. Our first guest for what is our UCEA co-sponsored event with the Wallace Foundation, and I must say that this is an extraordinary event that we've had because we've been able to engage in this partnership at UCA's annual conference for the last 6 years. So it's quite a tremendous opportunity to partner with another organization, and the Wallace Foundation continues to engage with us in this way. Our first guest is Gerardo Gonzalez, who is the Dean of the College of Education here at Indiana University since July of 2020. Welcome. 2013. 2020.
Quite there yet.
He's one of our future leaders as well.
Leader in training.
It's part of UCA's work to look into the future. We're just projecting. It's Friday, sorry about that. Gerardo Gonzalez has been a tireless advocate of a quality education for all and has been a spokesperson and proponent of creating a seamless system of education from pre-kindergarten through college. He has actively promoted state and national policies to prepare educators who can effectively work with all students and create educational environments that foster leadership development and student academic success. Under Dr. Gonzalez, the IU School of Education has maintained overall excellence, ranking in the U.S. News & World Report's top schools of education nationwide for 13 consecutive years, in fact, since his arrival in 2000. In the most recent rankings, the school ranked 19th overall and 10th among public university graduate schools. Second on our panel, we have Sarah Shelton, who is a senior policy specialist with the National Conference of State Legislatures. Welcome. She manages the program of education leadership work, which is funded by the Wallace Foundation, our co-sponsor for today's general session. In this capacity, she tracks and analyzes legislation, writes policy briefs, and presents before legislative audience. She also oversees a network of legislative education staff and provides networking, professional development, and support for staff across the country. Thank you. You're welcome. Our third panelist is Kathy O'Neill from the Southern Regional Education Board. She will be offering the state's perspective today. Kathy serves as the Director of Special Leadership Projects at the Southern Regional Education Board. In her work, she continues to promote the initiatives and helping state departments, universities, and local school districts redesign school leadership preparation and development and implement working conditions that support successful school leaders. Our fourth panelist today is Rick Ginsburg, who has served as the Dean of the School of Education at the University of Kansas since 2005. Is that correct?
21.5.
Everyone wants to be a futuristic leader. Used to be transformational, now it's futuristic. He currently serves on the board of directors of the Council for the Accreditation of Educator Preparation. Many of you know this as CAPE. Is former chair of the Kansas Professional Standards Board and past chair of the Board of Directors of the American Association of Colleges for Teacher Education, AACTE. He was a member of the CAPE Commission on Standards and Performance Reporting. In his most recent research, which is forthcoming, he focuses on accountability in teacher preparation and how professions measure outcomes for preparation. Our final panelist is known to many of you as the Executive Director of the University Council for Educational Administration, Michelle Young. UCEA, for those of you who don't know, is housed at the University of Virginia, where Michelle also serves as a full professor. Through her work with UCA community, Dr. Young has been instrumental in increasing the focus of research in educational leadership and leadership preparation, and brings research to bear to the work of policymakers around the country and internationally. So, if you will, please join me in welcoming our panel. With that, again, what I'm going to do is turn the time now to Dr. Gonzalez, who will talk to us about a dean's perspective on state policy and what's going on in our field. At the end of his presentation, please again take time, if you have questions, to write them down so that we can vet those at the end.
Thank you, Andrea. Good afternoon. Hope you all had a nice, relaxing lunch. Had a chance to walk around our beautiful city, as the weather is beautiful out there. So if you haven't, I certainly encourage you to try to make some time to visit the surroundings. This is a beautiful downtown, and we're delighted to have you here. And Indiana University is very pleased to serve as co-host for this exciting conference. So I've been asked to give a little bit of a perspective as a dean in this policy world. I got to tell you that at least in the last 4 or 5 years now, as I think of all the things that I do as dean of a major college or school of education, I spend more time on policy issues than probably any other single activity. Maybe fundraising is a close second. But academics, the traditional role of the deanship, advocacy for your unit, all those things are part of the job. But if I have to think about what is demanding the most attention in terms of time, it is the sort of policy environment that we find ourselves in one way or another. Yet, when I think of my preparation as for the deanship, there was precious little attention given to how do you deal with the policy world. You know, how do you become an advocate beyond advocating for your own unit in your own institution? And I don't think any of us in education could have really anticipated the intense level of policy initiatives, critique, challenge that the whole arena of public education is confronting today, and certainly higher education and educational preparation. As in Indiana, we have somewhat of a unique arrangement, I think, in terms of how we're organized. As Dean of the School of Education, I'm responsible for the education programs here in the Indianapolis campus, the IUPUI campus, as well as the Bloomington campus. And then I provide academic oversight of the 6 other regional campuses of Indiana University, the schools of education in those regional campuses. So I deal with this policy from a local perspective around regional campus issue, urban issues, as they typically apply to our IUPUI campus, and from the perspective of a traditional residential major research university. About 4 years ago now, maybe 5 years, we were confronted in Indiana with an initiative launched by our former Superintendent of Public Instruction, Dr. Tony Bennett, and I'm sure everyone here has heard of Tony Bennett. Not the singer, the other Tony Bennett. And that initiative came to us in higher ed and to K-12 education in a well-organized, very deliberate way, but without any consultation. So Dr. Bennett was elected in 2008, and early in 2009, I managed to get an appointment to go see him, to offer congratulations, and to offered to partner with him. He was very gracious, met with me, agreed to be a speaker at one of our upcoming alumni events, and 2 weeks later, he introduced what became known as the Rules for Education Preparation and Accountability, which if they had been adopted in Indiana would have put schools of education largely out of business. It would have eliminated the secondary education major. It would have dropped the requirement for leadership preparation for principals and superintendents. You could add licenses to become a teacher just by taking a paper and pencil exam and so forth. It would have been a total disaster. And nobody was consulted, nobody in the education field that I know was prepared for the implications of what this REPA meant. And, of course, the governor's office, Mitch Daniel, who's now president of Purdue, was solidly behind the initiative, and reportedly, I say reportedly because, I obviously wasn't present, he held a meeting or reached out to the university presidents and said that this was going to be introduced maybe days before it was, and that he did not want the universities to resist this initiative. Well, I was on vacation, or thought I saw, or I thought I was. And I'm getting off the plane in Myrtle Beach, and my phone goes on. I have a message from the reporter, the lead education reporter from the Indianapolis Star, telling me that this has been introduced, and what did I think about it? Well, first I had to find out what was introduced, but by that time the reports were flying, and I realized that unless something was done, that this would, in fact, put schools of education out of business. And there was a narrative behind it. We need these changes because teachers don't get enough content, was part of it. And we need to increase flexibility. And we need to strengthen accountability. Who would argue against any of those things? But it was really misinformation, because in Indiana, schools of education always require at least the same level of content than the secondary disciplinary majors requirement in their teaching field. Yet the narrative was written. It was all about this effort needed in order to give teachers the content they needed, because you can't teach what you don't know, kind of thing. So immediately we had to organize to try to counter the narrative in an environment where you had to do so at the risk of some peril, because the governor, the superintendent, the commission, everybody was furiously advocating to get this passed. And it became very clear to me that as the dean of a major education school, the major education school in the state, I had a responsibility to speak out loudly and clearly and aggressively against this incredibly damaging set of proposals. And so I became the face of the opposition. And, I was quoted, I was contacted, I was asked to comment, and any opportunity that I had to do so, I did, because I felt, nobody was speaking to this issue. And what I learned very quickly by doing, because again, there was nothing about policy advocacy in my preparation for the deanship, is that you can enhance your effectiveness if you follow certain procedures and certain take stock of certain elements that help achieve your goals. And so the first thing that we had to do was select an understandable critique of REPA, because the public, they don't know what REPA means and how teachers are licensed. So we had to select an understandable critique and to emphasize in the public. And the soundbite, if you will, that we selected was that REPA constituted a lowering of standards, which it would have done, and an attack on the profession of education. It was deprofessionalized teaching. The second thing that we had to do, challenge the misinformation with facts. Again, the narrative, time and time again, that kept being repeated was that REPA was needed because teacher education colleges don't teach any content, and how can teachers be effective if they don't know what they're teaching? Yet that's not true. So we had to counter it with data. And then we had to build coalitions because immediately we were framed as being status quo, resisting change. And so we had to build coalitions of parent groups, of school boards, of education leaders to reinforce the message of lowering standards and deprofessionalization, and that's what this REPA really meant. And we had to use the media effectively because it became a public spa immediately. In fact, after Bennett introduced his proposal, he went on a media tour of the state, repeating the misinformation. And the papers, they don't know. They don't have the education reporters in many cases here in the state, and they were just repeating what they heard. And that's what the public was hearing. So we had to immediately mobilize the media. I wrote many op-eds. I see that Chuck Carney, who's our director of communications here in the audience, he oftentimes helped me draft those or put me on to reporters who were interested in the topic, and we became a team because the media was critical to this. We had to develop rapid response to comments that people made. We had to provide interviews to anybody that would talk to us. And most importantly, we had to stay on message because there was so much in this REPA initiative that if you tried to counter every little thing, the public would get totally lost. And so our message was crisp, was clear. First of all, this represented wholesale lowering of standards for educators and education. It means deprofessionalization of teaching in the education profession. And we require more content now than what REPA would have us do. We will be lowering the requirement for content. And even though there was a lot of other things in REPA, that was our central message because we had to keep repeating it to get people to pay attention. So my point is that I think advocacy and community organizing must be an integral part of leadership preparation going forward. I see no real prospect of this climate that we're in changing anytime soon. And unless we become effective advocates for the things that we value, the things we believe, and learn how to use data, and learn how to use the media, and learn how to mobilize, and learn how to stay on message, and build coalitions, I think, will be standing back in the year 2020, looking back from them and say, what happened to our profession? Because that is what's at stake here. And so I was very pleased this morning to hear Cindy Reed's presidential address, and her vision, her commitment to make this notion of policy, advocacy, and effective organizing to counter this incredibly aggressive criticism that we're under, most of it often not justified, and to make that an integral part of our profession, the preparation of future leaders. Because whether we like it or not, if you're in a leadership position today in education, you will be called upon to either be quiet, get out of the way, or step up and challenge those changes that are being fostered upon us. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. And Dean Gonzalez, I appreciate your message about advocacy and community organization and organizing rather and collaboration. I think it actually dovetails nicely into what I am going to talk a little bit about today with state legislatures. So Andrea, thanks for the introduction. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today and share a little bit about the state legislative perspective and preparing principles. And as Andrea mentioned, I work for the National Conference of State Legislatures, and we are a bipartisan member-based organization that serves legislators and legislative staff in all 50 states and territories. And I have the privilege of working on our leadership work, and we've been grateful to partner with the Wallace Foundation for over a decade now to really engage legislators and legislative staff in these national conversations around improving school leadership. And it's really through our work with Wallace that we've been able to collaborate with a number of organizations like UCEA and SREB and others. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here. So, and I do have a couple slides. So it's really in this spirit of collaboration that I wanted to give you a snapshot of the changing legislative landscape, and it has significant impacts on state policy. So most of you are probably aware of the state legislative changes in your state, and they mirror national trends. And we've seen significant turnover in 2010 and 2012, due in large part to redistricting and term limits. And my legislative colleagues in our legislative management program would say that in 2010, Republicans really cleaned house. And we've seen a lot of chambers, especially in the South, change party control. We also know that nearly a quarter of all legislators were new to their position during the 2013 legislative sessions, and probably most staggering, that nearly half, if not more, of all legislators have had less than 2 years' experience since session started in January. So that's significant, and it has significant impact on state policy. And why? Because we have a number of new legislative leaders, we have a number of new education committee chairs, and a number of new education committee members around the country, and they really need help getting up to speed on key education issues. So I really encourage all of you in your work to engage with the legislature early and often, and certainly don't wait until you need an appropriation. We say that state legislators can really be effective partners in this work and want to work with you and collaborate in making a better pipeline of effective school leaders. So, with that, let's talk state policy. And let's start with the foundation here and talk about, and I think I have a slide change, thanks. So starting with the foundation of statewide leadership standards. So states are defining and setting standards of principal effectiveness that really reflect the latest research and focus on instruction and student learning. They can also ensure that standards really drive preparation program approval, licensure, mentoring and induction programs, evaluation, and professional development. And we know that at least 47 states have adopted leadership standards. In Iowa and Illinois are examples of 2 states that have done this legislatively. So what's on the horizon? Well, I'm sure you all are aware that there's a movement afoot to refresh the ISLIC standards to reflect the new context in which leaders are leading, including an emphasis on managing and developing teachers. And I think states will follow suit. I think they'll update their leadership standards to reflect these new roles and responsibilities and expectations of school leaders. And it's my hope that they will continue to link these standards to all aspects of a school leader's career continuum. So the second policy lever, and the one that you're probably most interested in, is a preparation program redesign and approval. And as you know, states set the program approval process and specify the program design elements for principal preparation programs to earn state approval. You also might be familiar with states that are sunsetting current programs and requiring them to redesign their programs based on new standards and requirements, and then reapply for state approval. And a number of states are doing this, and Kentucky and Illinois are states that have done this legislatively. In addition, states are allowing alternative providers, so non-university-based providers like states, school districts, and other nonprofit programs to prepare principals, and they're really holding them to the same requirements as the university-based programs. And in fact, we know that 31 states in DC are allowing non-university-based providers to prepare leaders, and Illinois, New Mexico, and Washington State have done this through the legislative process. So what's on the horizon around preparation? Well, I think states will continue to redesign principal preparation programs and sunset them and require them to reapply for accreditation. I also think that states will continue to allow non-university-based providers to prepare principals. So licensure requirements. Setting licensure requirements is another significant lever that states have to improve principal effectiveness. And this can include initial licensure and then licensure renewal, which states can really base on outputs such as demonstrating effectiveness in supporting high-quality teachers and improving student outcomes, so rather than inputs like years of teaching and degrees. States can also expand alternative routes to certification, and a number of states have done this, including Connecticut, Illinois, New Mexico, and Washington have done it through the legislative process. So what's on the licensure horizon? I think states are moving forward towards issuing and renewing licensure based on effectiveness, and a few states are moving in this direction, although not legislatively, at least not yet. Rhode Island and Louisiana are states that are starting to link licensure and evaluation and require principals to demonstrate effectiveness in order to receive and retain their licenses. And I think more states, once they've developed their performance-based assessments, which a lot of states are struggling with this for good reason, I think they'll follow suit. And then the fourth policy lever is statewide longitudinal data systems. And states are developing and supporting these longitudinal data systems to, among other things, really track principals as they move from preparation to licensure to on the job. And states can really use this data, and data like preparation program enrollment and completion rates, results on licensure exams, employment and retention rates, and then principal performance on the job to improve principal preparation and allocate resources strategically. And state legislatures have done some of this work in Colorado, Connecticut, Illinois, and Washington state. So what's on the horizon for the data lever? You know, I think states have made great strides in building the data systems, and I think now they really need to focus on implementation and ensuring that the data is used for making strategic decisions and investments. And finally, I know you all are aware that legislatures allocate funding. And although state budgets are improving, state policymakers are still having to make difficult decisions about what to fund, and we really encourage them to direct their limited pot of resources to programs that are most successful in preparing principals. So with that, it's the end of my presentation, and thanks for your time, and look forward to the discussion.
Well, hi, it's great to be here. My home department is in Ed Leadership and Policy Studies. Used to come to this meeting as a faculty member for many years. You know, those of us who teach large classes always know that the A and B students sit in the front, so I've got to change my remarks because I've got a lot of C and D students in this room, I think. We've really done something remarkable in schools of education. We are the one bipartisan product in Washington, D.C. Nobody likes us. We really don't have any friends. We have nobody advocating for us. It differs from state to state. You've heard Gerardo and the NCSL comments, and you know what the context is in your state. I heard yesterday that Gerardo was talking about the bill in Indiana to potentially wipe out preparation. For teacher education, you're probably all aware of the NCTQ rating of teacher preparation programs. We are under attack in ways, we've always been under attack to some degree, I think, but we're under it in ways that is unprecedented. As you heard, legislatures are allowing alternative deliverers outside of universities to deliver principal and teacher preparation. If Senator Alexander and Senator Better from Tennessee and Colorado respectively get their way, they'll pass the GRADE Act, which is a part of the UCEA reauthorization. If that happens, they're going to allow non-universities to offer the equivalent of master's degrees. So, I mean, we've got to be realistic about what it is we're facing. I want to talk about accreditation. Boy, that's a popular subject, don't you think? It's like, I'm going to talk about root canals and colonoscopies and filing your annual performance evaluation forms, all the things you like. But I want to argue that we're in a policy moment now, much like a teachable moment, where accreditation, and I've got some slides if you would cue them up. They have really nice fall colors, if you can pull those up. If accreditation is done right, I think it can help us as a field. But that's not mine. That's me. What's it? Oh, so that is it without the background? Oh, I'm sorry, they blew my fall colors. You can bring that back. The weather changes rapidly here, yeah. So bring up that first slide if you would. I think accreditation can move us to a higher ground and give us leverage that we've not had before if we do it right. That means we have to all participate. I'm going to talk a little bit about the movement to CAPE, so you have some understanding of that. But tell me if you disagree with this. Every profession embraces professional accreditation fully, except for us. It's not mandated in our field. I mean, could you imagine your universities with a non-accredited law school, medical school, engineering school, or business school? They wouldn't have them on campus. Only half of the universities in this country carry professional accreditation, half. And that falls on our shoulders, I think. We have to embrace it. Now, look, I mean, I got engaged with NCATE and now CAPE because I couldn't stand NCATE. I'll be honest with you. It was like sitting and getting a root canal without any Novocaine. I think it's going to get better. A little bit of history. We had these dueling accrediting agencies in education up through 2005, 2006. With all the external critics, it made absolutely no sense to have dueling accrediting agencies arguing with each other publicly in our field. It made no sense whatsoever. Starting in 2006, there was some talk about merging, and what we were asking these two accrediting agencies to do was to vote themselves out of business and to come together as a single organization. Two organizations that had very different approaches and very different raisons d'existence. And lo and behold, in 2010, they voted to do that. It really is quite remarkable, I think, that happened. And what the CAPE did, in order to move its work along, as they appointed a commission made up of 42 members. It included state commissioners, principal superintendents, teachers. It included a lot of the people who are critics, the people from the Fordham Foundation, from Teach for America, from the New Venture Fund, people like that. And these 42 people came together, and we developed a set of standards. The idea of the standards is that they're going to be dynamic, and we'll make changes over time if what we have isn't right, but we're going to base it on the best research available, or we'll look at the impact of what we're doing. Let me talk about the standards, if you go to the next slide. 5 standards. The first 3 came about as a result of the National Research Council's extensive lit review about what was associated with student learning. Strong content and content pedagogy is the first standard. Clinical partnerships and rich clinical experiences, including stronger supervision of our students when they're out there in their clinical fields and placements. And quality of candidates. We're talking about dramatically ratcheting up the selectivity process for candidates. Now, these things are creating a lot of havoc, I think, right now as they're coming out. But if you look at those 3 standards, I think you can see that they match pretty nicely with what's happening in leadership preparation as well. Standard 4 was focusing on program impact. Student learning is the main one here, and indeed the standards say that if the state mandates VAMs and it makes the data available, that should be a part of the picture of what you look at, along with teacher observations, employer satisfaction, candidate retention data, completer satisfaction, some of the things we look at. Now, as the new data systems come on board, the expectation is that there will be more data available to us. The idea is multiple measures. The idea isn't that one would necessarily dominate the other, but we want to get as full a package as we possibly can of how our candidates, whether it be for teaching or for leadership programs, ultimately do. The last standard had to do with a quality assurance system and continuous learning. I've been around long enough to know that many times we look at the assessment data and we look at changing things only because the accreditation is coming up, so we have to look at those data. The idea is to build this into our ongoing process. Actually, the same thing that you teach your students who are becoming principals and superintendents. We're going to ask of you what you are asking of your students. We also included 2 new things as we developed the standards. One was that we were going to create levels of accreditation. There will, in essence, be for lack of a better term, a gold standard along with regular accreditation and then probation and not meeting it. And finally, we're going to create a data dashboard, and there will be annual reporting. We want a lot of transparency here, so every institution will be required to report on a variety of these things that I just talked about under the program impact on a yearly basis on their website, so prospective candidates can see how the programs are doing and what they look like. Go to the next slide. Now, how does this tie to policy? What are the leverage points that the Commission identified? Having strong clinical experiences. You know, in leadership preparation, we require clinical experiences, but perhaps this is something we're going to have to look at in terms of how we do it. Some do it really well, some do it less well. Some do it the same way I did it when I started about 35 years ago at a university. It seems to me that we've got to look at that. Candidate quality, that's the selectivity process. Inclusion of all providers. One of the major things that we've demanded is that the alternatives routes have to be held to the same exact standards that we at the university are being held to. And indeed, we had some of the alternatives sitting at the table, and they didn't walk away when we voted on this. So that's powerful if we can get that to come about. And again, the big focus will be on P12 learning, however we might operationalize that. Obviously, this was heavily research-based. If you go to the CAPE website and pull up the report, you'll see there are over 100 references to research studies that substantiate each of the standards. We were pretty optimistic that this is a time when we can use this to leverage some change. Last one, how does this tie to, if we go to the last slide, how does this tie to you in your programs? You know, I think in the past, standards have been levers for change in educational leadership. Indeed, the report that UCEA just put out that was talking about leveraging for change pointed how standards in the past have really had a pretty good history of focusing change on preparation programs. Here what we're doing is we're going to talk to you in the field to create what the standards will be for your field so that you can use that to leverage the changes that the research argues that we need to move towards. These will be tied closely to the ISLIC standards and the ELCC standards and the others that, the QM standards, the others that, and the UCEA's own standards that are out there. But again, you will be the ones asked to devise these for leader preparation. As with the teachers, the idea is better data used for continuous improvement. And with that, we think we can go out to the various publics that we serve and say that, look, we're not these dolts that the people in Indiana are pointing to. We can hold up evidence through our accrediting process that we are about the same things that our critics are saying that we're ignoring. And finally, we think that we're going to need close cooperation between the Organization of Leadership Preparation, UCEA. CCSSO has taken a big stand in improving leadership preparation. We'll continue to do so. And obviously, CAPE can work together so we can build a system, I think, that can help us through this policy moment. And I'll step down. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Andrea, and distinguished panel members. My name is Kathy O'Neill. I work for the Southern Regional Education Board, which is made up of a board of the 16 Southern governors that we serve. I always start out by apologizing to everybody right off the bat, because I usually manage to step on somebody's toes, if not everybody's toes, by the time I'm finished. But I have a passion for our business, a deep passion for our business, and I spend a lot of time on the ground. I am in school districts. I am in universities. I am in state departments. So what I want to do is talk to you a little bit about what's been happening since we started this initiative at SRAB in 2000. SRAB actually came about in the 1940s, and no, I did not start with them, okay? I know I've been in this business since the earth was cooling, but I wasn't then there. But anyway, the Wallace Foundation needs a lot of credit for much of the work that's happened. And we were their first grantor in the year 2000. We helped them to begin looking at what it would take to build strong leadership. And we did a lot of background research on schools that were successful and came out with 13 critical success factors. Some of those are in pamphlets on your table. If you don't have enough junk to take home with you, there's some there. What we found was a disconnect between what was happening in schools that were successful and what was happening in preparation programs. So we invited universities and state leadership academies to come to the table and work with us and to see what we might be able to do about connecting the dots. From that, we developed about 19 face-to-face modules and recently about 8 online modules, trying to help give a picture of what a curriculum would look like if it really emulated those critical success factors that we saw in schools. We worked with the first lead districts and the first SELP districts, which were part of the Wallace initiative. These were states and districts who were given extra resources in order to lead the charge. And in many ways, there's been progress. And I want to talk to you about some of the good things, but I also want to build on some of the things that I've heard. And what do we know now? What do we know? We know that all states have standards. I don't care who you talk to, you all got them. Whether they're working or not, that's the first thing everybody will tell you. Every one of them I talk to has told me they've been redesigned. They have redesigned. Unfortunately, what comes out of this is that we write a whole lot better than we do. Think about that. Because policy without implementation and accountability is a pipe dream. And we've developed a lot of policies, and I'm going to spend time in purgatory, ladies and gentlemen, because I've led a lot of sunset and redesigns in a lot of states. And I go back and visit, and I'm thinking, was I actually here? But there are islands of excellence, and I want to talk about some of the good things. But we may be our own worst enemies with some of the criticism, because we really have to put our nose to the grindstone and talk about some things. I'm just going to birdwalk a minute and tell you a little story about one state I was in, and I thought, oh my gosh, we have got it. Everybody's on board. These universities are going. I went to a conference, and one of the profs comes out and says to me, I just heard somebody speak, and it's the best book I've ever seen, and we're going to use that for the curriculum next year. And I said, well, does that fit your standards? No, but it's a great book, and it's going to work just wonderfully. That, unfortunately, is the reality of the day-to-day work sometimes, is that we are not adhering to some of our own connectivity. So let's talk about some things. In the last 15 years, the curriculum has gotten a lot better. I can say that because when we looked at the curriculum in the 2000-2001 era, there was no connection to curriculum, there was no connection to instruction. So we have done a really good job with that, and I think you need to know that. There are more practitioners being utilized in ed leadership faculties than ever before. Now that's the good news and the bad news, because if they're there telling war stories, you don't want them. They have to connect. There has to be some connectivity. Ed leadership faculty are hopefully now doing better research. When we started this in 2000, there was almost no empirical data that said leaders made any difference in what happened for kids. And we have it now. So we've made some real strides there. In the beginning, the accreditation guideline was what we followed. But now we're beginning to look more about impact studies than accreditation. And I have to say that, Rick, I agree with some of your comments about accreditation sometimes was like root canal and probably didn't give us the results that we wanted. Let's talk about some things that maybe we might want to look at and change. One of the things is that policy does not always equate to practice, and we need to be more vigilant about how we apply it. I know that we have a lot of discussion about licensure programs, about sunsetting, about redesign, but unless that translates into what's actually going to happen in our programs, it's not going to be of much benefit to us. We do have to be advocates. In some places, we probably need advocates to close programs down. And you all know who they are. And we all know that there are programs who just should not be in operation. And I'm sure you've heard the research about the fact that there are 3 times more doctors in the United States than there are ed leaders, and yet we have 10 times more institutions preparing ed leaders than we do medical professionals. So there are some issues that we really need to address. We also have a changing population as far as the leadership in schools. I don't want to pick on any states, and this is not a criticism, but one of the states that I work with a lot is Tennessee. And Tennessee has 2 headlines that just struck me as I was reading the papers there just recently. One was Memphis, charters, choice, and experimentation. The other was Nashville, cloudy with a chance of charters. That state is going very, very much in the direction of a different kind of needed leader. If you have charters, whether you like them or not, if you have choice, if you have experimentation, your leadership population cannot be the traditionally prepared leader. They're almost like a mini superintendent. I think one of the levers that probably has not been discussed that may be what will help us change and help possibly make sure that leaders are better prepared is an emphasis on our new evaluation strategies. Now, it can be the best thing that ever happened to us, or it can be the absolutely worst thing that ever happened to us. And we can make a difference in how that rolls out. States are running around coming up with evaluation instruments that probably are not ever going to hold up as being reliable and valid. Yet we have the expertise to get involved with that and to help see what we can do. And I've stood in front of state legislators and say, I am not against evaluation, but it has to be fair. It has to be aligned, and it has to show the results of the work that we're involved with. That, to me, is probably going to be the bump in the road that most of us are going to face in the next few years. How do we help make that evaluation work? Just read an article that they were all upset, the legislators in Delaware, because only 1% of the teachers were found to be deficient. Well, when they talked to the principals said the instrument's not good and it has a flexibility index, and we used it. They need to have the work of researchers like the people in this room to help make that work. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's been terrific listening to our guests who've joined us here at UCEA. I just want to really thank them for coming and joining us today. It's been wonderful to hear the different perspectives on the issues that are facing us as education leadership preparers. And it's interesting because these are the types of conversations that we've been having within the National Policy Board over the last couple of years, and in particular within our partner organizations like the Council of Chief State School Officers. Within the last year, our conversations have focused in on the ISLIC standards and on how the different national leadership standards are being leveraged for improving preparation program. Some of you may have seen the report that came out of the Council of Chief State School Officers called Our Responsibility, Our Promise, which came out under President Tom Luna, where they've really ramped up their focus on how do we improve educator preparation. Oh, he's got a copy right here. That led to conversations for some of you who've come to some of the Wallace sessions that have been held here at UCA this over the last couple of days around whether or not the same set of standards fits for all states, for all contexts, for all districts, for all schools, et cetera, and the conversations that Sarah alluded to around doing a refresh of ISLIC and a revision of ELCC and so forth and so on. The Council for Chief State School Officers went to the Wallace Foundation and asked them for funding for this initiative. And at first, the Wallace Foundation had a number of different questions. foremost among them was, do standards even matter? And if they do matter, how do they matter? So if you could advance the slide. In fact, they had 3 key questions, and they're on this slide right here. How do standards impact preparation? To what degree do they, how are they used to have the potential to improve program quality? And are there alternative approaches that we could be using? And they asked UCEA if we could investigate these questions. So we put together a team, and we began looking in particular at ISLIC and at the ELCC accreditation standards. We also looked at the UCEA program standards and the quality measures standards. We started by taking a look at the research that could be aligned to these different content and program standards. Then we also looked at the number of different research and policy reports that have been put out over the last few years to determine whether or not there was alignment among the different policy reform initiatives and what the research was saying about how you leverage effective preparation and effective practice. And then we also took a look at some of the data from NCATE on ELCC and how it was impacting preparation programs. And then finally, we developed a survey of preparation program coordinators and asked them about the types of standards that they use and the types of things that seem to be both or influential, and this is very different from beneficial. So 2 different things. Is it influential and is it beneficial in that they saw it as something that was impacting them and or helping them to improve their programs? And we produced this document, actually I don't see it there. I think you may have an old slide. We produced a document for the Wallace Foundation to help them decide whether or not they were going to move forward with the revision of ELCC, and I'm happy to say that they said, yes, we will do that. So what you see here on this slide are the key areas in which standards are used to try to leverage both preparation and practice, but of course they're also used in a variety of other ways. Sarah mentioned a couple of those in terms of leader evaluation and so forth. And as Sarah also mentioned, what we do know, and Kathy mentioned this as well, is that every single state pretty much has standards. 46 of them claim that they've either adopted or adapted ISLIC. And most of them may not call them the ELCC standards, but they use some form of the ISLIC standards for preparation as well, and they very much reflect the ELCC standards. But what we also found when we took a look at the literature is that there is some misalignment between the literature on what effective principles do and what the standards say, more so at the district level than at the building level, which makes you take a moment, if you think about the implications of that. So if we're using these standards to prepare people to place and evaluate folks, and we may have some misalignment, it may be time to think about what the misalignment means in terms of the way that standards look in the future. It's also important to note that many of the policy reports that came out, there were pretty significant gaps in terms of what was being suggested that we do by reformers and what the research was saying about effective practice. And I'd be happy to share the report with all of you. So the second thing that we found was in terms of how they were being used. So the primary way is through accreditation and licensure, but we also found, as Kathy stated, that a lot of states have been using these policies for program redesign initiatives, particularly late 80s and more recently. We've seen a lot of activity in this area. Also, there are processes where these policies are being used, or standards are being used by professional associations, like UCEA, like the EDC, like Murphy and McCarthy and Mormon have done a lot of critical friends reviews. So there are lots of different pockets of activity where these standards are being used to try to promote program improvement. Unfortunately, there is very little empirical evidence, very little work that's being done to actually try and track the impact of any of this work. There are case studies of what it looks like, but there's very little work done in terms of accreditation, in terms of licensure, or the way that professional organizations or state associations have been using these standards to improve preparation. We looked across fields, and education is not alone in not really knowing whether or not accreditation or licensure matters. And the one area where the team did find a base of research was in the engineering field. And they were able to say that there was impact in terms of the quality of the program as well as the impact on the candidates. But as you might imagine, at least in its current form of TIAC and NCATE, not necessarily, what did you say? I think it's going to get better, which is great. The philosophy that's been used through the ELCC process is not what you see reflected within the engineering field. Many of you who've gone through the ELCC process know that you put in your information, they check and see whether or not you meet the standards, and then you find out whether or not you meet the standards. You don't necessarily get information that enables you to use that to improve your program. Hopefully, in the new version of CAPE, that will no longer be the case. You'll get information, and we can create processes that will promote the use of that information for program development. The fourth area is we found that there was a veritable patchwork of policies within states, where you had policy layered on policy that for licensure, for placement, for evaluation, and they didn't always match. And this is definitely problematic when preparation programs are doing one thing, an urban district or a suburban district is requiring something else, and then the evaluation system looks quite different. Those types of systems need to be, first of all, those folks who are in charge of them need to be talking. The systems need to have some sort of an analysis and an alignment that takes place within the future if we expect to move forward. And then fifth, when we asked faculty, the program coordinators, about these different levers, what they felt like really mattered, they said that accreditation in its current form was influential, but it wasn't beneficial. They felt like they were using, what did you say, a root canal, that they spent a lot of time, a lot of energy putting the information, and the bang for the buck, the bang for the time just wasn't there. Which may be one of the reasons why we have a lot of education schools that have not bought in. I don't know. And hopefully, if people feel, if our colleagues feel that the next system is worth really investing in, and if we can make that case, then we may see a real turn in the tide, and let's hope that happens. Licensure standards, however, was more favorably viewed, and you heard Kathy say that over the years that she has noted that they have looked at the curriculum of educational leadership preparation programs, and what they have found, and what we have found in UCEA, is that yes, indeed, standards have made a big difference in terms of the content of leadership preparation programs. And faculty say that having standards, knowing what it is that is expected of leaders, is helpful in terms of developing your curriculum. So standards do matter, and beneficially so in that regard. Next slide. So there's a significant difference between just adopting a set of standards, and this is kind of, again, getting to something, I think it was Kathy that said this, that adopting standards is not the same as thoughtfully putting standards to work throughout your education system to ensure that you're using them well to develop individuals throughout their career. We found that standards do have the potential. They have the potential to set expectations, to guide improvements, and to influence practice. However, if we don't design the process to achieve these goals, if the process is not well conceived, if it is not done in a way that that we don't have the misalignment that we currently have, then the impact of the standards is obviously going to fall short. And one of the comments that was made in one of the pieces by Murphy and McCarthy and Mormon was that if we don't pay attention to both the technical and the adaptive aspects of these reform initiatives, then essentially the nature of the impact that we've seen so far, which is basically episodic and not sustainable, is basically going to be the story of our future. So in terms of our recommendations that we made in this report, we had 6 of them. One of them was that we really need to promote ongoing renewal of leadership standards. Instead of taking a look at them every 6 or 7 years, we need to figure out something as a field to ensure that as the field changes, that we are nimble enough, that our standards are nimble enough to reflect what we consider to be effective leadership preparation and practice in an ongoing manner. And then secondly, that we promote not just the use of content standards, but also program feature standards. And Rick noted that some of the standards, content or feature standards is in the new CAPE standards, such as the selection piece and the clinical practice piece. But within our field, we've noted that there are a number of other features that are just as important. And we want to make sure that we really think about whether or not those also need to be reflected within our accreditation standards in particular. Also, improving and streamlining the accreditation process. It's wonderful to know that CAPE is really taking this seriously, and how education leadership is positioned within that is not altogether clear. The CAPE board did not include folks from leadership area significantly within their discussions. It's wonderful to have people like Rick who do have some background in our area, but it would also have been really quite wonderful if we had a significant number of folks there who know about effective leadership preparation and what it looks like today. It's also important, as Rick noted, that we have a national movement towards having a accreditation system that we have, that we all buy into. Even if we don't have any evidence that accreditation matters, if we can come up with a really high quality system, it's very important that we engage in, as a field, that we agree upon what it needs to look like, and that we engage in the field in looking at our programs and improving them. And then thoughtfully mapping and aligning processes and policies and structures for improvement, including making sure that the organizations that have the capacity to provide technical assistance, to provide review, to inform the processes are at the table and working together to make this happen. And then finally, research dissemination and utilization. As Kathy said, policy does not equal practice. It does not equal practice. We need to be thinking about research and how it gets disseminated and how it gets utilized. And currently, because of our lack of research, the reform initiatives that are being played out within our states, there's not research to support them. And that's as much our fault as it is anybody's. I mean, if there's not any research that says how we actually move this field forward, then you're basically going to have to make something up and work from there. So this is the time, if there's no other time, this is the time, if we're going to have new standards, if we're going to have a new accreditation process, and potentially a new set of policy systems, this is the time for us to be collecting some significant amount of baseline data so that the next time we're having this conversation, that we can say, oh, well, look at this. this actually does matter, or this is actually causing an effect that we didn't want to have happen. And the final thing that I'll say is that ELCC standards focus on content. There are other standards like UCEA that focus on features. And if we were to really think about what we know about effective preparation programs, we can figure out something that can actually work for the majority of institutions within the education leadership preparation field.
I want to be sensitive to our time, and I know that we're coming to the end of it. I think our panel has given us a lot to think about with regard to giving greater attention to the changing landscape, the politics of the work that we're doing, the need for greater attention and engagement on our part to policies that are both within our states and our nation with regard to leadership preparation and practice, and the role of policy advocacy and how we can utilize our expertise to inform that debate. With that in mind, I'd like to invite you to visit UCEA's website at www.ucea.org with regard to publications and tools and processes for continuous improvement that if you're not already familiar with, you can re-engage, you can become familiar with and engage your faculty and your programs in. I also want to thank the panel on behalf of UCEA, our partnership with the Wallace Foundation, and an appreciation to the Wallace Foundation for co-sponsoring this general session. But if you will, please join me in thanking the panel for their words of wisdom and guidance today. With that in mind, I know that we're headed, the conference at this point is headed into a break. We're right about 3:10 almost, but I do know that there were some hands going up. So if the panel, and I know you have a flight to catch, but if you have a few moments, okay. If we can, Amy, if we can go back here, we have at least one question, right here in the middle. If you could stand up.
Oh, I have a bunch of questions
Oh,
right now.
okay. Can we get this audience question first, if we may? She's a young woman sitting in the back here.
If you all do have a question, even if you don't think we'll get to it, please write it down or email it to us because the Wallace Foundation has requested we submit them for their next webinar.
Great.
Thanks for calling me a young woman. I couldn't help but notice the difference between Dr. Gonzalez's orienting remarks at the beginning and Dr. Young's remarks at the end. At the beginning, you were talking about a political campaign in which research, as far as I could tell, research played much less of a role than getting a message, a really clear and simple message out to the public against an initiative that, as far as I can tell, was probably based a lot more on ideology than research. And then at the end, it was really interesting that Dr. Young's talking about we need more research, we need to collect data, so I know it's not either or, but I couldn't help but notice the real difference that, the real difference that 25 minutes made in terms of where we started in Indiana and where we ended up. And I wondered if anybody wanted to comment on that or if anyone else had noticed that journey we made, because I was really noticing the differences in, like, if we have 24 hours in a day to spend, should we spend, how should we spend it? And I know it's not either or, but those are real different choices to make, it seems to me.
Well, let me briefly comment on that. I think that what has been missing for me, what I have not seen in most of our leadership preparation programs, is how do you take the knowledge, the research that we generate as part of our different professional lives and translate that into information that can be quickly disseminated and conveyed to a public and to policymakers that would make a difference in the ultimate decisions that they're made. I mean, in our case here, research was very important, but I couldn't send a report or an article. I needed to convey this, for example, the requirements that we have for the content that teachers have to have in almost soundbite. And I think that when we think about preparation, we need to think not just in terms of good research practice and how do we generate the data, but then as leaders, how do we use those data in such a way that can impact policy, and you're right, they're two different worlds. If I may say also very quickly, while we're challenging the critics and trying to advocate, and I think we all have to do that because of the world that we live in, we also need to innovate. And, educational leadership per se is not my field, so I don't want to sound, or try to make myself sound like an expert in it, but there's an awful lot of similarity when I look across programs. Like almost everyone is doing the same kinds of things. And it's almost inherent in standards and in standardization that that's what you get. And I think, if we get too concerned on meeting the standards are laggards, because we see a need, it takes a process, you create standards, and everybody gears up to creating a program. What's happening in our policy world is dynamic, and we need to be ready to change and produce. And so while we are learning and adhering and following the best of the standards, we also need to maintain the ability to innovate outside of whatever the standards are. And one of the things that we disseminated in the tables, is, if you haven't seen, there's a brochure, some innovative programs that we've done in Indiana, which you should have. And at the heart of this program is this partnership with other fields. They're not going to be doing anything based on our standards. Yet, the people out there, the policymakers and others who are impacting our life in very meaningful ways, want to know that we are able to borrow from the best and implement from the best of what's known in disciplines outside of education. And so I think one of the challenges for us is how do we break out of our own traditions, continue to implement and move forward the best of those, but be open to incorporating ideas from other disciplines, other fields, other thinkers, that ultimately gets translated into a different kind of leader for today's world than what we have been preparing people for the last century or whatever number of years we've been at this business.
Yeah, I think that's a very perceptive comment. Put another way, the ideologues never let facts get in the way of a good opinion, But the reality is that if we want to, it's not a zero-sum game. We have to advocate, and we have to have something to advocate with. And the coin of the realm now is the impact on P-12 students for all of us that have anything related to the P-12 world. And so that we have to have research that substantiate the kinds of things we're doing. And if there's having an impact, much as Michelle's indicated, that we have to show that accreditation is having some positive impact on the programs. So you're right on the one hand, but we've got to move on both ends.
One more question, sure. This question is for Sarah Shelton. An often overlooked and essential stakeholder for a reform commission are university faculty, those who actually deliver the prep programs. Why did the NCSL not explicitly include this in their recommendations on page 11? Reviewers of programs rarely include university faculty.
Thank you for, okay, thank you for the question. I think that it's very important, and I guess a message that I want to get across is that legislators need you in the conversations around improving principal preparation in the Capitol, especially with the number of new legislators we have across the country. They need your help and expertise in crafting this language and laws. And I encourage you to reach out to chairs of your education committee, members of the education committee, and approach them, have them come visit your programs, send them whatever research or impacts of your programs, let them know the good work that you're doing, and get yourself in the door so you can help shape some of these policies at the state level. I think it's critically important, and they want to hear from you. And I'd be happy to help anybody who wants to reach out to a legislator in your state. I'd be happy to help make that connection for you. But I just can't emphasize enough that they want to hear from you. They should be hearing from you. And you should be able to be part of these discussions at the State House.
Yeah, and let me just say that our critics have a lot of money behind them. My state has the Koch brothers sitting down in Wichita, and they fund ALEC, and ALEC has has become a competitor for a wonderful organization, the NCSL, housed in Denver. And so they'll be pumped. They look at their website sometime. The laws are already written. What we've got to do is provide some evidence, the counterfactual, if you will, so that they have that in front of them, as you're saying. And so, I mean, it's contingent upon us to get out there.
I think, unfortunately, our time is up this afternoon. However, I would invite you to descend on the panel to follow up with additional questions. And then, again, there's a coffee break on behalf of UCEA, the Wallace Foundation, and our conference. And thank you for coming, and enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you.